you are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas. I will be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Vanessa Scotto. On this show, we're talking about being students on the embodied spiritual path, and what on earth does that even mean? So what is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, all the joys, all the messes, all the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We will be attempting to sort that out for ourselves here on the show. In today's episode, we are tackling the issue of embodiment. So we use that phrase, embodied spiritual path. We talk about embodiment a lot. And I think the question becomes a lot, if I have a body, as long as I'm alive, what does disembodiment even mean? I mean, how is it possible to not be embodied if I'm in a body? So really, in a world that, quite frankly, doesn't value even a tiny fraction of the miraculousness that lives in our bodies, how do we start to understand what treasures are available for us there and how we miss or avoid those treasures? Just a note before we head into the conversation that Vanessa and I do have tendencies to have occasional profanity as we're having our conversations. So if there's kids around, you probably want headphones on. And if profanity isn't for you, well, then we apologize. Okay, here we go.
Okay, Brooke, this one's a big one today. Hello to all of you listeners. We're going to be talking about disembodiment. And what does that mean? And why does that happen? And the reason why I think that this is such an interesting conversation is, of course, we can be disembodied without even realizing it. Like, in other words, why even talk about embodiment if it was a state we were always occupying? And when I went to school, and I went to grad school for psychology, and we were studying a lot of somatic psychology and a lot of work with being present in your body and showing up, I really couldn't understand, not really, what it meant to be disembodied. I mean, if you think about it, it's like we're always here. We're always in our body, right? Like, I'm exercising, I'm moving. I mean, how can one not exist in one body? And it's still a question that, even though I've answered to some degree, I find to be an interesting one. So, Brooke, I thought I'd kick that over to you, since I seem to be the one kind of with that deep, deep ponderance. What the fuck does it mean to be disembodied, and how is that even possible?
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you that, and I have dedicated my whole path in life to understanding this question. So it's easy to have my brain explode in a million directions about different things I want to talk about. And it's easy to overcomplicate it. But I don't want to do that, because overcomplicating things or intellectualizing things isn't particularly helpful, I don't think. So I think what you're saying is absolutely true. Like, we just take for granted, I have a body, so I must be experiencing my body as long as I know it's here. You know, I use my hand to grasp the glass of lemonade that I am going to drink, so I have a body, so it's all good. But I think what we miss in a culture that really, really, really does not have a relationship to the body, other than thinking of it as this kind of fleshy machine that we can make do our bidding. You know, how can it help us to stay healthy? How can I make it stay healthy long enough so that I don't get sick and I get to live to the age I want to live to? Or how can I, be cute for bikini season? Or how can I deal with this problem I'm having going to sleep at night and sleep better? You know, so it's always kind of this fix-it orientation, which is fine. You know, that's not to say, like, I'm somebody who grew up with chronic pain and neurological issues, and I got better. Like, I'm a big fan of feeling better in our bodies. But I think that we can oftentimes just think of them as these, like, transport vehicles that do our bidding. And when we live in a culture that is so brain-oriented and so disembodied and so touch-starved and sensation-starved, like, we don't even have many words for sensation. Like, we're really, which I think that speaks to the impenetrable cultural veil, meaning it's the hardest thing to see through. But if I have a client come to see me for pain, if they're trying to describe what they're feeling, they have to concoct all kinds of words because we just don't have language for it. Like that's how blinded we are to the body. So anyway, my point being, in a culture that really doesn't have a connection to the body, what we forget is that the body isn't just a vehicle to do what we hope it will do. It's actually, it is our mind. And unfortunately, like body-mind connection has been one of those phrases that's been used so much that it's been corrupted a little bit, like marketing-wise corrupted. I think it makes our brain turn off when we hear it, like, yeah, mind-body connection. But what we're really saying is that if you believe that there's such a thing as the unconscious mind, meaning there are things at play that we're not always aware of, and that there are these programs kind of sometimes running our show in a way that maybe we don't see at all in the present tense, and sometimes we can see them in the rearview mirror, then we believe that there's such a thing as an unconscious mind. And that's a very, very, very basic and I think pretty widely accepted construct in psychology, right? So if we accept that that's true, what we need to know, the missing piece, is that our body is our unconscious mind. And that's the thing, like that's the big link. Our body is the tangible, alive thing that is our lives. It's the map of our lives. It's the map of our unconscious patterns and our holding. And so if we can cultivate a very deep, lifelong relationship with it, we have access to, in the present moment, all kinds of stuff that we wouldn't normally have access to. So we've all had that rear view mirror moment where we were like, why did I date that guy? He was such a dick. You know, like why was I in that relationship? And you look back and go, gosh, why did I tolerate that? That's the unconscious mind. Like that's a very straightforward picking the wrong person kind of unconscious mind thing. I see it in the present tense and you can look back and go, yeah, every time I was with him, I kind of had shallower breath and queasy feeling in my gut. And I was always anxious. I was always on edge. I was there was some unconscious pattern that we were unaware of until a further point in our lives. But if we have access to our bodies, we can be much more aware of this whole range of experience, not just of ourselves and our own psychology, but also of the world, the whole environment that we exist in.
I remember when I first went to grad school, they cited a statistic. I want to say that it was about 95% of what we do is driven by our unconscious. That really freaked me the fuck out.
Yeah, it's really freaky. And I think it's true. And it's scary. It can feel scary.
It's true. And as a control freak, it really unsettled me. It unsettled me. There's an idea in psychology that part of the process of psychology, like the evolution, comes from making the contents of the unconscious conscious. And that idea exists in Buddhism and other spiritual traditions as well, that it's like, you know, Reggie Ray often says that enlightenment really is about making the unconscious conscious, that when all the contents of your unconscious were conscious, then you would be enlightened. So it's quite a process. And what I like in what you're saying is I just want to kind of drill down how we could maybe define disembodiment a little bit in what you're saying. And so it's like, here's our body. It's the unconscious. John Wellwood's the first person who told me that. The body is the unconscious, period. So if we were to accept that, if everyone listening was to accept that, then the unconscious contains a certain, it contains a few things. The first thing that it contains is our own unprocessed experiences and feelings and repressed memories and belief systems. And so it has the personal contents of the unconscious, aka our memories and our narratives. But then it also has in the unconscious things like our intuition, our moment-to-moment sensations and feelings, as you're describing, Brooke. And so, like, the unconscious is this living thing. It's essentially anything we're not turning our focal attention towards can be considered material for the unconscious. It's really a question of whether we allow ourselves to experience it or not. And if not, it can get repressed or pushed down into the body or into the subconscious or unconscious mind. So I guess we could say on a certain level that disembodiment is disconnecting from the cues, the signals, and the material that arise in the body, the intuition, the unconscious, the sensory experiences that we don't feel comfortable with. And so there's this way that we can really get, sometimes they call it the Cartesian split. Like, Reggie's pretty big on talking about the right prefrontal cortex and the left prefrontal cortex. And, we all have heard that kind of right brain, left brain thing, like the left brain's analytical and rational, and the right brain is creative and artistic, and it's sensorial. And in the right brain is where we feel whole and holism, as if we're connected to everything. So what I think happens is over time, disembodied means I start to value the world of my pragmatic, rational mind. I start to value the world of my belief systems, of my linear thinking. I start to eschew my intuition, my felt experience, my feelings, my primal knowing. And that in and of itself, I think, is a fair kind of working definition of disembodiment that can help us understand A, what the problem is, and B, how to get back to ourselves. What do you think of all of that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a way of dissociating, which, something I want to touch on too is just that that's not without value, right? Like, it's a protective mechanism. When something is too much too fast, or something happens at an age where we really can't understand it or process it, how uncomfortable it is to hear our parents having an argument in the other room or something, when we're really little, that we have patterns that defend us, so again, this all comes very much from the psychology world that likes to talk about things in terms of the thinking brain, but really it's this primal contraction that happens in our physical selves that happens completely below the radar of what we're aware of doing. This pattern that we might have of breath that just becomes a little more guarded, a little more shallow, and that has these repercussions of the way that we carry ourselves, and we just kind of stiffen a little, and maybe we stiffen a little more in certain circumstances where we hear people bickering in the grocery store, and it reminds us of when we were 5 and we heard our parents arguing or whatever. And so that's where I feel like something gets lost when we only talk about the thinking mind. The thinking mind is the place where we tell stories to ourselves that we believe. And those stories by nature, cannot be happening in the present tense because they're storyfying. They're telling us some story about what we believe ourselves to be. Like, oh, I'm the worst. Nobody likes me.
I'm always the worst.
I can't believe they had a picnic and I didn't get invited. Or, we can be storyfying about the future. Like, oh God, when I get that new job, my days are going to feel completely different. It's going to be amazing to have new coworkers, whatever. But we're telling stories. We're not having an experience that's unfolding in the alive present tense. And so the alive present tense is the body. Our body is our perfect resource point. And, one of the places that I have beef with getting so hyper-focused on mindfulness as the way to having a better life, you'll be more peaceful, you'll be more productive. Again, these are all good things. This is a good path in. But I think that in a culture that has no appreciation for the body and is completely disembodied, we can do it just in the mind. Again, like, ooh, I can control my thoughts, or I can push away thoughts, or I can not have thoughts for whole periods of time. And then I feel really, really peaceful because I'm not storyfying. But for me, the thing that is troublesome with that is that there's not a place, there's just something to let go of. There's not something to go towards other than this idea we have about being more peaceful or having more equanimity. And what we can go towards is this whole unfolding universe of sensation that can only be happening in the present tense. If we really get in, if it's not just telling stories, which we can do, of course, like about, my problem hip, it's such a problem, and we can keep playing a loop. But when we really go in and get curious, that's a curiosity about the present tense. And it has this whole beautiful ground to play in that's different than just going up in the mind. Am I being monkey mind again? Stop it, monkey mind. Quiet down. And it's like, okay, but what's happening in the space?
Okay. Well, naturally, I agree with you. And I just want to say, I love that you have beef with the mindfulness industry. That is hilarious. Very timely about when we were born. I think that I want to give a personal experience, actually, because so I was on this trip and I was traveling for 30 days and I'm in different cities, and depending on the different city and the different state of mind and the different place, I really had greater and lesser access to my body, so to speak. And what I really mean is that there's times when I can feel as if I'm inhabiting every cell of my body, every toe, my fingers, like I'm present. That's what I mean by when I say present. There's other times it feels like I just don't have connection to myself. I can't find a way in. I don't feel calm. I don't feel at ease. I don't feel very alive. I feel sort of disconnected or shut down on a certain level. So when I was in Vancouver, I found that city to be overstimulating. I noticed I was shutting down in my body a lot. So here I am, and from this place, I'm starting to make decisions. I'm not feeling well, but my husband wants to go and go to Whistler Mountain, even though we spent a whole day outside and I was actually exhausted and it was another 3 hours. But I'm like, sure, if that's what you want to do, let's do that. So I go to Whistler Mountain. Well, I come home, I'm sick now. I'm totally sick. It was like more than my body could handle. But I want him to have fun. I want him to have a good vacation. So 2 days later, I'm out and about wandering the city all day, walking 10 miles, and then I get a migraine. And it keeps going. And I keep watching how I made these decisions that were really against the grain for my body. And I would venture to say against my intuition. It was not like I had zero access to that awareness, although it wasn't in the foreground. So then break that down and see what's happening. And how I can begin to look at it is that in my unconscious, in my body, is stored a few things. One, wisdom of what's in my highest good, like what I am capable of and what feels right and acceptable to me. Two, in my unconscious, I have these narratives, like you were saying, Brooke, like these storylines that we're accumulating from our past, these narratives like, I'm a burden and I'm too sensitive and I'm too weird and I don't want to ruin someone's time with my needs. So all of these things start to activate. How I see it is my body was giving me messages. My self, in psychology, they use this term like the big S self, like the higher self, was giving me messages. Vanessa, this is who you are, and you would enjoy rest right now, and you would enjoy some quiet right now, and this is what is good for you and what is right for you. And it's telling me all of that. But I don't want to accept that. My personality, my left-brained construct of who I should be and who would make my husband happy and who would be like a healthy person to be, all of that is swimming around. So I am disconnecting from my sense of knowing. And I'm living in all of those cognitive constructs about how I should be. And in each step, my unconscious is guiding me. My narratives are guiding me. My shoulds are guiding me. And I made all the wrong fucking decisions. And it was wonderful to see in retrospect. But I just think it's a good example of how sneaky it could be, because I've dissociated my life. When you dissociate, there's like grosser levels of it that are so apparent. It's like I'm disconnected. I'm fogged out. That wasn't how this was. It was like a much more subtle moment at which I just bypassed my deeper sense of intuitive knowing. And I think it's really interesting to see, why do we disembody? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is as simple as we want ourselves to be different than we are.
Yeah. So well said. And that's such a nice, nuanced example of that. And it's so basic too, right? It's being on vacation
Yeah.
with your husband and wanting to please, like it's the most ordinary desire in the world. Like
Yeah,
I
you
should be the
look
one who's
back.
fun on vacation.
Yeah, it's fun, right? And I look back and it's like, okay, I was sick, but I'll never remember I was sick. I'll remember I was in Whistler, and you look back, but there's that interesting level of what does it mean to consistently push away what feels right to you, what feels whole to you, what connects you deeper to yourself and to your life? What is it like to continually push that away in favor of some idea about how things are supposed to be or who you are supposed to be? Because that has a pretty big ripple effect.
Yeah. And I want to sort of piggyback on your experience example about something that gets to when it, like I was saying before, so we're never perfectly embodied. We're never perfectly aware. I will definitely let you guys know when I attain full enlightenment. But for now, no. And even then, right? Like I don't want to actually glorify that journey because, I know people and I've studied with people who, say that they have attained realization and they never talk about it as like having grabbed the brass ring and now they can chill out and never suffer again. Like it's just a different kind of process. But anyway, so we're never going to be 1000% perfectly aware of everything that's going on. So it's about just cultivating this very respectful relationship, the same way you would cultivate a respectful relationship with a partner in your life. That you want to hear what they have to say and you want them to hear what you have to say. And you want to be able to have a really healthy, tender, loving, nourishing dialogue going. So there are times when, our body really isn't trying to screw us. Like it's really not trying to wreck our lives by shutting down our ability to be totally present to the moment. It's trying to protect us, and that's true for compensatory patterns with injuries and all these things. It's really not trying to be this little mischievous gremlin that wrecks everything. So, for me, I had a birth injury when I was born, as I, mentioned in the early episode when you interviewed me, Vanessa. So I grew up with chronic pain. I grew up with some physical stuff. I grew up with a seizure disorder. And I grew up feeling really embarrassed about my body because it couldn't do the stuff that other kids could do. And I also grew up, with some eventfulness in my neighborhood environment, meaning there was some trauma in my childhood and in my adolescence. And by the time I reached my early 20s, in part because of a physical injury that I had had at birth, but also a lot because my body was just hanging on for dear life. I wasn't able to open my jaw anymore. Like my jaw locked shut, and I had severe chronic pain to the point that there were days I couldn't get out of bed. I was seeing doctors 3 or 4 times a week and I was commuting from Providence to Boston to see them and blah, 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 blah. But, that's an example of my body really, it got into this habit early of overprotecting, over defending, because I didn't know how to feel what I needed to feel. And what happened for me that was really fortunate is that eventually through this process of, rock bottom, yay, rock bottom, who doesn't love the opportunity of rock bottom? I got into receiving care. And, that care was many things, but for me doing Rolfing and doing manual therapy, it was like it just got something moving, right? So I was addressing the physical pain, but it was like my body had become, if you ever come across on a hike, like a very, very, very dank, stagnant pool of water, like that water hadn't moved in forever. And it was like growing mold and smelled really funky. And there were like flies buzzing all around it. And there was something about receiving manual therapy that just started this process of softening, physical softening in my body that started to allow me to soften and to be able to make the stuff that I was defended against in my unconscious more conscious in a very workable way. Meaning I didn't, for me personally, because I had this sort of care team, which included therapy and biofeedback and whatever, I didn't experience overwhelm with it. And so we don't need to have shame about when our bodies are breaking down or when our bodies are defending against. And it's really useful to know that just a little attention, just a little like, hello, I understand you're probably going through some stuff, can just create this process of movement. And that's what you were talking about, of making the unconscious conscious and making it workable. And then our lives unfold differently instead of just being the stinky, stagnant pool.
Yeah. And there's multiple ways to begin to make that unconscious conscious. And I've had some great energy work and body work and then psychotherapy and then meditation and all these different ways that it starts to become conscious. One of the things I find cool about our defense mechanisms, and kind of like thank God for them, is they really won't give you what you cannot tolerate at that moment. They're really good like that. So as you were saying, like as my body, let's say, softens, or as I build capacity through my meditation practice or build trust with a psychologist, like in any of those moments, it was like my awareness got deeper and deeper, and what I recollected got clearer and clearer, both feelings and memories. I did something called EMDR, which is, a form of psychotherapy that works with your neurobiology that started to unlock memories. And it was really interesting. One of the things that I realized at that time that I really didn't get before, because, I'd heard the term repression. I mean, I was in school studying to be a psychologist, and I think we all kind of know the term repression. The way I'd always associated it is like you push back a memory. Like I didn't remember someone hit me, or I didn't remember something bad happened to me because I couldn't bear it. But what I found in EMDR, and actually increased my understanding of repression, was I actually had remembered all the events of my life, at least, that I know of right now, but I had remembered everything. What I had done was disconnected feelings from the memory. So I had this kind of like picture of things that could happen. I could picture my father being angry, and I can picture, kind of the chaos in my household. Remember these very clear, pivotal moments that fear started in my life, but I actually had no feeling associated with them, really, almost like an echo. Like I'd be like, yeah, that was scary, but I didn't feel it. Then what happened when I did EMDR was it's almost like because what EMDR does, at least what they think it does, is it reconnects the right brain and the left brain. It gets the dialogue moving between the hemispheres. So as that happened, what happened was I could see these memories that I had talked about at some point in therapy before, or even just shared with a friend, like, my father chased me around the house and I was scared. And I could see that moment. And all of a sudden I could feel terror, panic, like thinking I was going to die. It was like they slammed together again. It's really freaking interesting and sort of overwhelming in the moment as they got reconnected, and very wild to see how like that was there, but I didn't know that was there. Like I could of course say I was scared, but that's very different than feeling actual terror. But as that happened, and as my right brain and left brain sort of reunited and the memories got pulled up and kind of connected again, it gave me space to kind of be honest with it, right? Accept what really happened in my experience. Not to say that would have been everyone's experience, my experience. I made space for it, right? That's what you were talking about, the relationship. It's like an act of love to make space for this is what happened. And I can kind of like honor it and hold it and have some empathy for it. And then in that process, as it got validated and recognized, eventually what happened is it released. And then as it released, I gained perspective. And as I gained perspective, I gained forgiveness. And then it was like, the whole thing just softened. And in that process, I could now be present and like breathe and not guard against this fear from coming up, because God forbid the fear came up, I would have to experience that incident and know that I was angry at my dad and basically all those things that I must have been fighting against. So I just think like as we observe this healing journey that we're on, it's so kind of cool and wild and mysterious how we work and how our defenses really work and how we really literally stuff stuff into our body I don't know, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It's so fascinating. I love the story you're telling because it just feels like the exact opposite of that stagnant pool. It's like that taking that crystal clear water and just like pouring it through and flushing it through. And there's this movement and suddenly things become workable, not just in relationship to the memory, but into your present day life. Like, what are the ways that the defended is happening that you don't even understand in your day-to-day life? And if you don't, if you can hold space around that and just allow it to even just to flush through, because you can actually hang out with it and feel it, then the defended pattern softens and goes away. You know, it really is this sensation of effortlessly something. It's not even like taking something off because that implies effort. It's like something just falls off of you. It's like this outer skin or something.
It's so organic. I always have noticed that the best therapy or healing process is very organic. It's like, you know, when I was younger and I was in that pattern of, I am easy to gain perspective, right? So my dad chased me around the house. My dad had a lot of rage. I mean, I love him. God bless my dad. But that's what was happening in my life when we were young. He didn't have better skills than that. And so it was very easy for me as a kind, compassionate, spiritual soul to like have perspective, right? My dad didn't know any better and to, you know, not really feel upset. But that was actually bullshit. It was all an illusion. It was my mind muscling something.
Totally.
We're really like, right? It's so crazy. And it's like, but viscerally, no, I was actually terrified. I was scared. I had ideas that maybe I was a perpetrator. I had ideas that I was bad. You know, all of this like muck and gunk was kind of underneath the surface. And I was just muscling over it, which takes so much bandwidth. Like if we all wonder why we're exhausted, the amount at which we fight with ourselves, judge ourselves, push away our feelings, undermine our experiences per day is literally exhausting. And to keep that experience at bay, the fear, the anger, the confusion, the belief systems, all of that at bay took so much energy. So then as soon as I opened it up, you know, which granted was an uncomfortable process, but as soon as I did, as you were saying, the clear water flows through, there was just this organic shifting. And then I got to a genuine place where I actually had perspective, but I didn't have to like lie to myself or hide or pretend it wasn't terrible or defend anything. Cause it was like, then we gave it movement and it just dissolved. It metabolized. It was really gone. And I got to that spiritual place I wanted to, but without bypassing my shit and pretending I was there.
Right. And that's the difference between an embodied experience and an intellectual understanding of things. You know, like what you're describing is exactly that. Like you have to have that visceral, felt experience. You have to be able to go through the journey and to alchemize, or else it's just the sort of like hanging on by your fingernails and an intellectual understanding. Like I intellectually understand that, you know, like in the example you were giving, right? Like that was the best you could do at the time. So I'm going to tie it up in this really tidy little mental bow.
So
it's fine now.
To be angry and I get to always like my dad and be
right,
sweet.
Right. Because now I understand because I'm an adult and I read a book about it, you know, like, right. But if we can't really have the felt sense, if we really can't go in, then we can never get to that place of really genuine relief. And this is why, you know, we have to have a practice. Like I can read books all day long, and I do, on Tibetan Buddhism and on embodiment and on psychology. And I like that. Like I'm of this culture. I love intellectual play. But nothing's going to actually change in my life unless I have a practice. And that practice is about just creating the time and the space to connect with my body and with myself without an agenda and without an idea of what I'm going to get out of it. And God knows, without any knowing of what the hell is going to show up next. But I have to make space, you know?
Yeah, I agree. My practice has been transformative. It's kind of amazing what you find just lingering in your body as you just make space for it and you breathe and you tune into it. And it's really been everything. And there's something else like I want to say about disembodiment is that Okay, so for me, I think some of it is cultural. I mean, we could probably do a whole episode talking about the cult of disembodiment that's formed. But so some of it was cultural, but a lot of it was simply that, as a young person, like many of you, and certainly like you, Brooke, I couldn't tolerate all of the feelings I was experiencing. I didn't understand them. I couldn't put them into perspective. My nervous system was like wicked overstimulated, and so, you repress them, and that's the gift of what our minds give us, is the ability to put things away that we think are going to drown us, right? So I disconnect from my body and I try to become the person I think I want to be, the person I think I should be, AKA I move into the world of the brain, specifically the left brain, and away from who I am on a like moment to moment level. And then I notice these things like, I know I should feel grateful for things, but I don't really feel grateful. Or it's a beautiful moment and I didn't feel it all. Like I don't even have great memory. Like my memory is not great from my childhood. And all of these things I realize is that it's like, you don't get to just turn down the volume on the pain. You just turn down the volume. And so this disembodiment happens because we're so afraid. I mean, not consciously. I mean, we barely make conscious decisions, right? It's like unconsciously, our survival instinct tells us, you cannot handle this. You are going to break, or you're going to fall apart, or you're going to lose it. And then we turn down the volume subsequently because it's the idea that it'll be safer that way. And then we turn down the volume on everything. And then we wonder why something feels like it's missing in our lives, why we're not as happy as we would think we could be, given that, everyone's probably pretty blessed that's listening in. I know I am. We're not as ecstatic. And it's like all of these different things. And I think so much of it stems from, in some ways, yes, habit, as you said, Brooke. It can stem from bodily pain, stems from culture. But when I talk to clients and feeling into my own experience, so much stemmed from being afraid of ourselves and afraid of the contents that live within us, and afraid that if we were to make some space, we'd be totally out of control and all of this stuff would unleash and we would lose ourselves, which I guess now that I'm saying this out loud really boils down to we lose trust in ourselves. We lost trust in ourselves. We can't even just be and make space because we're afraid that we're going to fall apart.
Yeah. And the more we have a practice and the more we have a really genuine relationship with our bodies, the more we're just expanding our capacity to hang,
yes.
And we're expanding. And that allows, I love that you talk about how it does, the volume gets turned down on everything. And it expands our capacity to turn the volume up. And that comes up on everything, and so it's like in my practice right now, something that I'm dealing with, that I'm just hanging out with, is that I just have started having this kind of gut wrenching anxiety feeling, like solar plexus, like I want to die kind of feeling. It just comes up out of the blue. It's not related to an event that's happening in the present tense. It doesn't, so far as I can tell thus far, seem attached to a story, although that might emerge at some point. It's just a feeling, and it's an overwhelming feeling, and it's really uncomfortable. And so it's this thing where it's like, okay, like, hi, here you are. And it's challenging to hang out with it and to not storyfy it. And then, the other thing that's happening at the exact same time is I'm having this like gripping anxiety feeling that just washes in every once in a while, is that I'm also having these moments where I experience the world as this crazy fucking magical, perfect place where it's like, I'm not pretending that I'm in some enlightened being, but I have these moments of like, oh my God, it's all so perfect and it's so beautiful. And it's like, I have enough space to feel joy, which is really foreign to me. And I think it's one of the things that a lot of us fear, even though we live in a time and a place where we're all striving for as much happiness as we can pack in. I think we're actually really afraid, or we don't have the capacity as much to feel the big aliveness and the big joy too. So it's like an anesthesia coming off in a certain way,
Mm-hmm,
and,
yeah.
but fortunately, it happens incrementally, and it happens because we're having a practice, right? So it happens in this way where we're just making a little more and a little more and a little more space. So it's not totally overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And we can start to actually be in the world, which is pretty great. And pretty terrible.
I have to agree.
It's all those things.
I have to agree. The root of the word ecstasy is to stand outside oneself. And I get the feeling that there's like, when we're like in ecstasy or bliss or big joy, it's like this kind of like falling apart, right? It's like this surrendering thing that happens where like something is moving through us. And when we're rigid because our ego mind is telling us we have to kind of keep it in these parameters so that we're safe, then yeah, I really do. I mean, I've seen this a lot. Joy can be very threatening to people. Big joy, like really liberated joy can be really threatening to people. And my practice has improved that, because there's these moments where like, even when I'm grateful, I feel like something's going to rip out of my chest, and I have to just be able to like make extra space and breathe and settle in and do those kinds of things. So I think practice is a wonderful thing. I think not doing things alone is a very, very smart thing.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. Critical.
God, no, I was just writing my bio and I was telling my story, and I don't know one of the things I was saying is that it's like this idea that we should do it alone is just as ego crazy as the idea that someone else can save us. Like, neither are true. The reality is liberation is an inside job. Practices build our capacity. They give us our ability to be with ourselves. They are so crucial to like making space and evolving and healing. And just having someone next to you is so fucking unbelievable, especially when what's inside is too much to bear. The truth is, people bear it with you. That's how it works. And it is magical and it is wonderful. So all of that, we disembodied for a reason. Rest assured, if you're listening to this and you're relating to any of it, you disembodied for a reason. You thought you needed to at that time, and you may have needed to. And so the path out has a lot of need for tenderness and love and kindness and support and patience and capacity building, like Brooke's saying, with our practices and hit us up. What are your questions around this? And, what are you guys going through? Because I think it's an epidemic. I know we're not alone.
True that. Yeah, write in for sure. And let us know. We'll chat some more. Thank you.
I have a feeling there's a lot more to come on this one. So.
Yeah, I know. In the tradition of coming up with 5 episodes that we'll do next, which we never do in any kind of linear fashion, we need to do an episode on fear of life and fear of joy.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Stay tuned for those exciting tidbits. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. The show notes, including any of the resources that we might have mentioned while we were talking, as always, live at blissandgrit.com. So if you go to the website and scroll down, you will see each episode in a separate post. And so the resources for this episode will be in this episode's post. You can also come play with us on the social media channel of your choosing. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Bliss and Grit at all those spots. It's a very handy way to communicate with us, and we love to hear from you guys. We love to hear what you're processing on your own paths, questions that have come up for you in your practice or just as you've listened, and feedback is always super appreciated as well. Speaking of which, if you want to support us, the most supportive thing you can do for sure is to write us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. iTunes has this thing where it will not display reviews until you get a certain amount. So we're being vetted right now since the show is new. It helps to let us know how we're doing, but it also helps other people to find the show and to let iTunes know that we're for real. If technology isn't for you, but you're enjoying the show, well, then you can also just tell your friends who you might think would be into it. And we're very grateful for that as well. We'll be back next week. Thank you again so much.